Move into the presentation of the Thermal Energy Network Unidos campaign by Drew here. Take it away, Drew.
Okay, perfect. So just to start, I'll kind of introduce myself again. Drew Harper. So I'm an energy engineer is kind of my day job, and then I'm also a volunteer with the nonprofit group Unidos, and I'm here to talk more about geothermal networks. So before digging into that, just kind of want to set the stage a little bit in terms of current state. So here in St. Paul, over 1 of 3 households are cost burden, including half of renters, which make up half of the city residents. So recent federal policy changes are expected to increase electricity rates between like 25 to 40%. So those folks that are pinched are going to get pinched even more. And then in particular, when it comes to climate change, here in Ramsey County and St. Paul, we do have above average exposure to extreme heat events, air pollution, flooding. So a lot of the negative consequences that come as a result of climate change. So what's something that we can do to help mitigate this? Well, I want to talk here tonight about geothermal networks. So a geothermal network would basically look like 2 water lines going to your house. And rather than the water going to like a sink or a bathtub, the water would be used to exchange heat. So during the summer, when you need to cool, it would help absorb the heat. During the winter, when you need to heat your house, it would actually help give up heat when partnered with a heat pump. So geothermal is not a new technology. It's been here in the US for just under 80 years now. But what is new is the concept of networking it together. So, and that's basically what we're advocating for in Unidos. So just like you wouldn't put a power plant in your backyard, we would want to network together geothermal systems so that we can benefit from the scale of it. And also, there's also a lot of other benefits that come with it that I'll dig into it as well. So even though the network piece is relatively new, it has started to catch on. So here in Minnesota, Carleton College, rather than replacing all of their natural gas-fired boilers, chose to go with heating and cooling their campus with a geothermal network. Rochester is also converting over their city buildings. And in Massachusetts, one of the utilities there, Eversource, is piloting converting over homes to geothermal for heating and cooling. We've got more that's in the pipeline as well. So here in St. Paul, the Heights will be a geothermal heat and cooled system once it's finished, once the construction is complete. And then XL Energy, our utility here, is also doing a pilot in Colorado.
District Energy downtown and Energy Park were also geothermal networks. Do those not qualify as geothermal networks?
So the District Energy, my understanding is that they're burning biomass to provide the heat, like the steam there. Although I know that there is a proposal to convert over that system to something where they can use the heat from basically the sewer water and capture that. So if that part gets implemented, that actually would be considered a geothermal network. And actually, that's one that we're advocating for strongly. I guess I should pause and see if there's any other questions that we want to ask.
I think District Energy does a solar network for heating and cooling of water too. We've got some impressive stuff, but I agree. I don't think I've ever heard them mention geothermal.
Good.
Are you going to talk about where the energy does come from then? If each house has a hot and cold pipe, let's say, the hot and cold are coming from something, right? So it's not biomass, it's something else.
Yep. So basically, the heating and cooling is primarily coming from the roof itself. So you dig 6 feet underground, you get a consistent temperature of about 55 degrees. And you might kind of wonder, well, how can I heat my house with 55 degrees? Well, when you combine that with a heat pump, that heat pump's basically able to boost that temperature from 55 up to say like 120 using the energy stored there. And then you're basically using the fact that the earth has a huge thermal mass. You can also, with a system like this, get a lot of benefits by taking waste heat off of systems. So in the case of that sewer system, sewer water tends to be a lot warmer from people that are like running showers or using hot water. So you can get heat that way. Or if you were to integrate it with something, say like a data center that are constantly generating heat, you can take that heat and basically feed it to a different building that needs it, like say a home in the winter. So no other questions. I'm going to detour for just a second and talk about the social cost of carbon. So really, the social cost of carbon is a term that refers to all the costs that are basically being socialized because there is no system where polluters have to pay as a result of climate change and the carbon emissions that come with it. So some examples that we would see here in Minnesota, you've got the health effects that can come from Canadian wildfires and any costs associated with, say, like childhood asthma and medical costs there. You've got property insurance and repairs from hailstorms and other events. And then last, we've got utility expenses associated with extreme weather. And as we kind of reach the limits of what our infrastructure is designed to handle, there tend to be a lot of large costs that come with those type of events. So I'll try not to dig too much into numbers, but as an engineer, that's something that's kind of in my blood. So the EPA puts the social cost of carbon at $261 per metric ton. And that's admittedly an underestimate from their own reports, because that's basically just what they can quantify. So if they don't know how to put a number to it, they assume it's nothing. So if you look at the city of Saint Paul, what's the social cost of the carbon that we're generating as a whole city? Well, it's a little over $500 million a year, or about $1,700 per person. The biggest chunk of this comes from the emissions that we get as a result of using natural gas and electricity, the energy that we use to power our homes, our businesses, and our industry. And the city has committed to being carbon neutral citywide by 2050. And they've done a great job with working a lot on their own buildings. So there's a geothermal system that will be coming to the Como Zoo soon. A lot of solar, other projects that they've got in the works. But if we're realistically going to hit that 2050 goal, we need to start planning now because of the sheer scale of what we're looking at and the enormous scope that would come with it. And just to prove that the social cost of carbon is not just a theoretical concept, I wanted to share the social costs that I've got that personally affect me. So, obviously each person's story will be a little bit different, but I wanted to actually put some numbers to it. So I moved to St. Paul in 2021. And when I moved here, the first year, my homeowner's insurance was just under $900 for that year. This past year, my homeowner's insurance is now just under $2,200. So if you look at the trajectory, we're looking at 25% increases each year. So when my policy renews here in a few months, I probably get to look forward to another $500 or $600 that I get to add on top of that. In the 4 years that I've lived here, there's been 2 significant hailstorms in my neighborhood. And so whereas my roof would be expected to normally have about 10 years of life left, I'm looking at 1 to 2. And when I've gotten quotes to replace that roof, the cost we're looking at is about $10,000. And you might be wondering, well, why don't I just use my homeowner's insurance to cover it? I've actually increased my deductible quite a bit over that time period to try and reduce my premiums. So I would actually end up paying about 90% of that cost out of pocket before the insurance would kick in anything. Utility bills. So if you have natural gas to your house, you're helping to, you're going to be paying from some of the social cost of carbon. So specifically what I'm referring to is in the winter storm Uri, which froze natural gas lines in Texas, actually caused a cascading event across the country of huge natural gas price spikes. And if you have Xcel Energy for your natural gas, we're still paying them back to this day, and we'll be paying them back for years to come, to the tune of $160 million in reimbursements for costs just from that one storm. So switching back to geothermal networks and the benefits that we could see as a result of that. So primarily the benefit is that they're extremely efficient. So most of that energy is coming from the ground rather than from burning fossil fuels or from electricity. In this case, it uses electricity to actually kind of keep the system moving. So it's over 6 times the efficiency of natural gas. And even compared to if you had a geothermal system just in your backyard, it's even more efficient than that because of the fact that you can share that heat. So like the data center that's generating heat all the time, that can provide the heat for your home rather than having to use additional energy to provide that heat. Because it's so efficient, you've got the potential to significantly reduce utility bills. And Eversource, the utility that is running the pilot in Massachusetts, anticipates, well, actually, excuse me, I shouldn't say anticipate. The folks that have been participating in their program, they've gotten 20% a decrease in their energy bills and then 60% reduction in their carbon emissions. Last, the geothermal system uses electricity, not fossil fuels. And by providing this as an option that businesses and homes can hook up to, we can provide decarbonization at scale rather than just relying on each person to kind of go and figure it out on their own. So we're basically would be giving an option. So ultimately, what I'm here to do is to ask folks to sign a postcard to Mayor Carter, basically expressing interest in taking the first steps towards a network geothermal system. And what that would look like is weatherizing homes so that they're in a place where they'd be ready to accept a geothermal system, electrifying appliances, and asking the city to start building out a plan so that they can see what it would look like. We're also asking for it to be done on a polluter pays type model. So ultimately, why should you act? Why would you want to sign a postcard? So ultimately, I'm asking anyone that believes that we should make this, we should hold the city to its promise to decarbonize entirely by 2050, that anyone that believes that we should build a better future together that's more affordable, provides clean jobs, and that ultimately we believe that addressing climate change is too important to just hope that everyone can kind of figure it out on their own, because that's really been the narrative and the model up till now, is that everybody just kind of supposed to look at their own carbon footprint, and you're just supposed to somehow figure out what to do on your own. So for the folks that are online, I've got a QR code and a link if you're interested in signing a postcard, or I also have postcards here for anyone that would want to sign them.
I just copied the link into the chat on Zoom too.
And that's my presentation. So
Awesome. Thank you. Cool program. Yeah.
Is it metered somehow? I mean, do you have a thermometer on the input and output line from each house, or how do you actually measure?
So in terms of like billing,
Yeah,
I'm assuming that it would actually be kind of on a gallons basis, kind of like water. So basically, they do measure the temperature of it, and normally you keep it, say, like 55 minus plus or minus a couple degrees. And then just how you would pull as much as you would need to in order to meet your requirements.
I noticed you said it's 2.5 times more efficient than air sourcing, but is it as like, can any home in St. Paul be converted to geothermal heat? Or is it
So
more for like larger projects like the Heights or a data center or?
so if you were to replace, say, like parts of your HVAC forced air system, it will take in-house replacements. It can't just like hook up to any type of system. So there would have to be in-home items that go with it. But ultimately, if you're willing to have some of those items in your house replaced, then it should be able to provide heating to just about any house.
So the fact that 1 out of 3 St. Paul households are cost burdened.
Yep.
Someone comes and says you should be on geothermal. What's that gonna cost?
So I guess I would point back to the pilot where they're basically they've seen that they can reduce costs by about 20%. Now, obviously, that's going to vary a bit from place to place, and that's part of why we want to ask for them to start building a plan so that we can start to get some more of those specifics. Because I mean, I wish I could tell you right now exactly what the cost of the whole project and everything would cost, but a lot of the design and a lot of that process would have to be figured out in order for us to have that. But if we can at least get that first step of the plan, then we can start to answer a lot more questions. But based on experience elsewhere, it looks like about 20% less per month.
Then how are you gonna help defray the upfront cost for the households? I mean, that's.
So it could be a couple different models. It could be more of like a city-owned system, kind of like the water lines. Or it could be more of a utility-owned system. So like if Excel were to own the geothermal system. I think those are kind of still open questions at this point. But I think either one of those would be a good option, especially because we're in a unique case, unlike Minneapolis, where Excel is both the electricity provider and the gas provider. So they get to benefit both from the additional electrical load and from replacing the gas system. So that's what I kind of envision as the most likely scenario, but doesn't mean that that's how it's going to unfold.
There was testimony in the presentation from other neighborhood scale projects that have already happened. At least there was like a quote from a person who said, I struck the lottery and feeling like one of the pilot programs. Where else has this been installed? Like what other places regional?
So the biggest ones are kind of the ones that I'd highlighted. So there's a lot of campuses and like schools that are looking at it. So Carleton being kind of the local example. We've got a handful of pilots. So really this kind of networking of it is a relatively new concept, probably just within not even 5 years at this point. If you look geothermal more widely, there are huge number of examples, even here within St. Paul, that we can point to. But the network is a much smaller sample size. So. Yeah,
that's kind of why it's a push to build a program or build the plan. It's like, we recognize this is an efficient and effective model. Let's figure out how to do it, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So Minneapolis is already at the point where they're kind of they're maybe a year or two ahead of us. So they've got funding to start. Exactly. So they're at the point where they've gotten some funding from the city, about $10 million, and they're kind of in that initial like pilot phase. They're selecting pilot sites, things like that. So that's one I guess in the pipeline. But yeah, I can't tell you like there's hundreds of examples, but there's a select handful. So we know the technology works, I guess. Is what I'm getting at.
I'd love to send a postcard if you have some there. I see.
Absolutely.
Since love going in the mail.
you're gonna say, like, how many separate types of setups would it take to do different neighborhoods?
So I think what would end up, what I'm envisioning and what I believe is what kind of Minneapolis will look like is that it would be similar to how water systems are distributed, because ultimately that's basically what's getting piped around as another water system. So you'd be kind of looking more at the city level, at the largest to maybe like in certain districts of the city. But I didn't go into this part as much. There would be wells that were the actual heat exchange that would get distributed throughout the city. So you'd have some components that are kind of distributed, but ultimately the whole network would likely be linked up at around the city scale.
Is the well kind of like the part that's under the ground that takes energy from the earth?
Yeah, exactly.
So imagine you had the Como one, because that's being built right now.
Yep.
And there was a neighbor across the street, and they convinced the zoo, hey, can I tap into your line? Then that would be a network, a very small.
Yep. Yep, exactly.
Address what you're talking.
Yeah, so there's no technical definition beyond like greater than one in terms of what makes it a network. But ultimately what we're advocating for is a citywide scale.
Yeah, I was just asking, thinking about all the infrastructure that goes into that, and costs and stuff, and how that gets defined.
Yep, yeah, definitely. So that's not, to your point, I mean, that's not something that we would expect homeowners to bear that upfront cost. That's something that we would expect it to be more like a utility model where.
And just to jump in, but to your point, to your presentation, we're already bearing the costs as homeowners for the system we're on currently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we were able to build out all these pipelines. We're able to build out the grid. We've got a model that works so that we're not having to eat that cost up front. It's kind of divided out over time to make it more manageable.
Cool.
We have a question in the chat. Is this most viable for multi-unit buildings first?
So, I mean, from an economic standpoint, it would definitely be most beneficial where you've got high density. So yeah, like multifamily, or if you've got really large loads, so say maybe like a larger business type application. So I would assume that it probably would start at some of those denser areas and kind of spread out from there. Just because then you've got more people hooked up per foot of pipe, basically, so that you have less pipe that you need to run up front and kind of get that momentum going.
Yeah. In my experience doing some community engagement on development work downtown, where they have district energy, which has the capacity to do their relatively efficient systems for heating the entire downtown if the buildings were all opted into plugging in.
Mm-hmm.
But there would be new developments that would come in, a new 6-story apartment building or something. And the developer, even at our meetings, would tell us, it would save me the building money in the long run to tap into district energy system, but I'm a developer. I'm not going to own it in the long run. I'm building a building. It is slightly cheaper for me to do individual unit heating units. I'm not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So like such a key part of these kinds of things is finding that incentivization for developers to invest in these things, make it worth their while, whether that's through some sort of subsidy or other program, direct sell or whatever.
That sounds like something the mayor should figure out in this program development. Any final questions for the presenter? Well, thank you for being here. It was super interesting. If you wouldn't mind passing around some postcards and maybe leaving some here too, if that's cool.
Yeah. Get those, and then got some pens.